Good morning and welcome to the CADclass podcast special edition with the one and only Pooch, Alan Puccinelli. And
Good
of
morning,
course,
everybody.
as usual, I'm Josh.
I'm Jake.
And we're going to be talking all things Prusa Slicer, especially what is tripping up Jake. And I think we've got the perfect guest to do it. So, Pooch, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on and why you're the man when it comes to this?
I don't know if I'm the man. First of all, I gotta say, I'm honored to be here. You guys are fantastic. I love watching your stuff. Both wizards of education and explanation. It's a little bit intimidating doing the live demo thing with you, just because I see how well Jake has done it in the past. But my name's Alan Puccinelli. I own a small company called Repkord. We do filament maker organization tool sets and stuff like that. And then on top of that, I work for Prusa as well, doing strategic partnerships and creator relations content. And I am just super excited to be here and talk about some of the cool stuff going on with Prusa Slicer today.
And I gotta give you a shout out. So you were instrumental in helping us get something that we now love, which Jake
What's that?
is. Seriously. What do you have over there, Jake? What do you have over there?
Very, very, very graciously, we were shipped a Prusa MK4 with a brand of printer that I have literally been on my wish list since I was in high school. When I was in high school, I was a bespoke woodworker out of my parents' garage, and I would just make random stuff for strangers on Craigslist, built up a pretty good woodworking skill set, but I was just like making a few $100 over the weekend, just doing woodworking. It was a ton of fun, and I saved up $1,000, and I was about to click the button to order a Mark III, and at the last minute I went, no, I'm just gonna put it in my savings, and I wish I didn't. I wish I would have got this one, and now I have one, and it's a little bit of worlds colliding at this point.
Well, you're here now. You made it. You got here.
I know. Yeah. I finally did it.
So it's good to have you, Maple Leaf Makers. Good morning, Spitfire. Good morning, Never Let the Machines Win. I had to look that one up in the past. I was like, NLTMW, what's going on here? It's really nice to have
Mike.
you all.
Mike's good people. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's really nice to see a couple of new faces in here. So why don't you take it away, Jake?
A little bit of context. Yeah, so a little bit of context for this.
Give us some context.
Basically, all of my printers that I've ever had, whether they're from Creality or Monoprice or any of these kind of budget-friendly beginner intro printers, I've always used Cura just because that's kind of what the internet told me right from the beginning, and then kind of started into it. So, back in the day, it was all of the slicer softwares, you had to pay for them. Is that right, Pooch? They were all a payment program, and it kind of sucked. And then,
yeah. What was the one that everybody was on? Simplify 3D.
Yeah. I think there's still a couple that people pay for, but really the free ones like Prusa Slicer and Cura and a couple other major ones, they all are phenomenally advanced and they can do everything. And I think for a lot of people, it was throwing up. Do you use Cura or do you use Prusa Slicer? Because, of course, you can use any slicer with almost any printer. And so it was really just pick whichever one works for you. And I just kind of picked Cura as just kind of a random choice. And I learned a lot about slicing, a lot about 3D printing. And now, as the kind of two companies are trying to beat each other with coming up with more and more improvements, as they should, then it's kind of leaning more towards Prusa Slicer as the main ticket. And so with the new machine, I want to enjoy a different slicer and see if there's any things that would push me from Cura to Prusa. Are there any things that I prefer in their actual UI? And what are some of the pseudo CAD tools? We see a lot of people where they go, oh, I want to be able to do this on this model or change this feature. And it's like, it's actually so much faster to just make a blocky random rough shape in CAD and then have your slicer do all the rough work. Not exactly an example, but I've got a little coaster that's the Shining Carpet pattern, one of my favorite movies. But if you just imagine this as a hexagon, that's kind of a pain in the ass to make in CAD. But if you just make this as like a normal cylinder and then pull it into your slicer and just say, yeah, no top and bottom, and just have like a honeycomb infill, it takes 2 seconds to do, but it takes half an hour to make in CAD. So in certain aspects, we're now seeing certain slicer softwares merge between CAD and slicing, and somewhere in the middle is where you'd find Prusa Slicer now. And so I've been playing with Prusa Slicer for about a month now, and there's some aspects that I really, really dig, but I just know that there are lots of little tips and tricks that I'm just missing that's going to make my life so much better. And so this is where Pooch the man is going to come in.
We talk him up, he talks himself down. We talk him up, he talks himself down. Watch this. Watch what he's going to do right here.
You don't know me. You don't know me, homie.
Oh, okay. All right. What are you going to say there,
I'm a humble guy. I'm a humble guy, and I would never purport myself to be a master of anything. No, you are not more humble than I, though, Jake. I am the most humble.
Of all. Yeah.
In the room.
Are we having a humble off right now? Okay.
Yeah.
But listen, I think you articulated it really well. That there are so many tools out there, and the tech has just come so far just in the last couple of years, and so now we have all these incredible options. Obviously, we each have our favorite tools. I've played. It's been a long time since I've played with Cura. I'm just so like ingrained in the Prusa ecosystem based on what I have. But at the same time, one of the core like ethos of Prusa Slicer is that it is open. It's built on a platform that is an open source platform, the former Slick 3R or Slicer, or however you want to pronounce that. And then Prusa acquired it and then has thrown a ton of development hours into improving it, optimizing profiles for their machines. And but if you look, there are still profiles for Creality machines for other, and people are constantly creating profiles. Like, we do like that it's open. There are some really, really cool features that exist in this slicer that don't exist anywhere else. There's also plenty of learning opportunity for us as we see what's being utilized. Like, for example, the Arachne slicing engine that controls like variable flow. Like, that was a really big thing that went in probably a little less than a year ago now, but that I know that was ported over from the Cura team and all that stuff. So there's a lot of give and take, and we really believe in the open platform and try to both innovate and give back. And so by no means are we saying like this is the only slicer that you'll ever need and use, but we are very happy about it. And obviously we spend a lot of time optimizing it to the machines that we utilize. So you'll see really good, robust profiles out of the gate. And I think that that's a huge value proposition that gets overlooked from a lot of people's experience coming in. When you buy a Creality or a value machine, oftentimes like you're missing a big part of the workflow when there's like, there are profiles out there, but it's not managed. It's not regularly run. I mean, the machines that Prusa makes, like they're running them to make the parts to make the machines. And so like daily they are getting just validation testing, internal improvements over and over and over. And if you watch how often we release new versions, it's happening faster than on any other slicing platform out there, hands down. So
yeah, and I think it's part of this larger thing that's happening kind of this year, which is just I would say the competition has ramped up significantly in the 3D printing and slicing world. And that's great for the consumer. It's probably going to be a little bit tricky for Prusa to navigate some of these changes, right? I'm sure there's stuff happening on the internals there that are a little trickier, but for the consumer, I mean, the consumer absolutely wins here. It's like what we're going to see.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I'm kind of pulling from the physicality side, where we're seeing less and less Ender 3 clones, where you build it and you click a button and it goes, and it may work, and there's going to be a lot of maintenance, and there's a lot of finicky stuff to kind of deal with. And we're seeing a lot more kind of microwave 3D printers where you can just kind of click a button and it works, and it will always work, and it will level itself and do all these things for you. And the thing that I really like about Prusa Slicer is that it's pulling that in virtually. So you can say exactly what type of machine do you have, what type of filament do you have, what brand, what color, and it has all these presets really built into it. So it feels I think pretty damn close to the microwave of slicers, where there's obviously different advanced settings that you can do, but it's making it as easy and doing the work for you, which I think, as far as beginners coming into the field, is absolutely one of the most important.
It's a game changer. It's a game changer. Yeah, I want to quickly plug something here really quickly. So if you're new to the CADclass podcast, we like to answer questions live on this show. So feel free to interrupt us. Ed asked a question just now. Feel free to interrupt us. The interactivity is what we really enjoy. So we're going to hop into the slicer settings. We're going to get in depth here, but if you do have a question, make sure you pop it in the chat. We've got one here. Is there anything like a pared down browser-based slicer for students working on Chromebooks/iPads?
Not that I know of.
Jake, I do know of one browser-based one that's really cool. I use it for the belt printers that I use. It's called Kirimoto. It's completely browser-based, and it's fairly robust. Now, granted, it's the slicing engine is tied to the power of the machine that you have, and so it can bork pretty heavily if you have that's a technical term, have an overly complex geometry that you're trying to slice. But it's pretty dang good, and it's pretty snappy even on just most modern Chromebooks and stuff. Also of note, there is a Chromebook. There is a way to get Prusa Slicer onto Chromebooks. I know there is a Linux variant, and there is documentation. If you go to the Prusa Slicer website, there should be some documentation on how to go about doing that. I feel like I recall hearing something recently that said that process has gotten simpler because it used to involve some extra steps in order to unlock your Chromebook in order to do that. But I haven't done it personally, so some things to look into there for you, Ed.
Another quick one here from Maple Leaf Makers says, can PS or the others slice for a belt printer, or do you need Kirimoto for that? I just impulse bought a cheap belt printer.
Idea Maker. Yeah, it's a deep dark rabbit hole, my friend. I'll tell you that. It's amazing though. I love it. I prefer Kirimoto because it does everything I want to do, and it's got the best enhancements and belt specific options for it. The developer Stuart is a good friend. He's been out to my shop, and he wrote a good chunk of it with belt printing in mind. So there's some really interesting little features in that slicer that will enable you to slice specifically for the interface layer of what's touching the belt, which is not as simple as just the first layer, thinking that you're printing on a 45. And so there's a lot more intelligence that has to go in to understanding what part of the model is actually hitting the belt. It's not just layer 0 the way we think of it on a standard Cartesian.
Deep.
But
Idea was way deeper than what we got.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, Idea Maker also has some belt slicing support, and there may be others. I think there's a fork of Cura that's pretty old for belt slicing. I didn't recommend it when I tried that.
So I want to kind of kick things off here. What would you say? I'm going to put you on the spot here, Pooch. What would you say to somebody like Jake, who's relatively new to Prusa Slicer, are the top 3 reasons, let's say, to switch from Cura to Prusa Slicer? Those big advantages that you're like, you're gonna pass. You're gonna punt that one.
I'm a bit biased here. For me, it's the integrated workflow and the tuned profile specifically for the machines that I use. I also, and again, this could just be because this is what I'm used to, but I like the user interface, the user experience a little bit better. But again, I'm just so comfortable with it, so that when I go back, I can't find things. The way that Cura historically, and Jake, you can correct me if I'm wrong because it's been a bit since I've dipped in, but layers on the advanced profiles can get to be a little overwhelming.
It's always been overwhelming.
Yeah, and then the last time I recall using it too, it didn't quite feel very snappy. It felt like it would kind of stutter as I was utilizing it, and it might have been an old version. I don't know.
There is a setting where it will re-slice and re-preview every single time you change any value at all. So if you know, I've got 10 things to change, and you do one, it will then stutter to do that, and then you do the next one, it will try and restart it. So it does it So if you have that enabled, it goes over and over and over again trying to solve it, which can be kind of a pain. But that is a feature that you can turn off. But like I said, I'm very native to Cura. That's kind of what I've always used, and so I'm trying to be as open as possible and accepting of. I'm sure there's some quirks to Cura that I'll find out. Oh, that it can be better. I'm sure there's some quirks to Prusa that I've ran into that you will know the answers around. So, do you guys just want to dive in?
Yeah. The last thing I would add to that, and it's a perfect transition, is that there are some new tools in Prusa Slicer that, as far as I'm aware, are not implemented in others, and we're going to actually go over them today. The cut tool, there's a lot of the text tool. There's a lot of little workflow things that have been really useful to me running a print farm and stuff like that. That I can't imagine going back. It's not to say that it can't get it implemented, but it's not on Cura right now, and we're going to talk about some of those tricks now.
Tips and tricks, baby. Let's go.
All right. So I'm going to share my entire screen. Yep. Go into some Prusa Slicer. All right. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to pull in a model of Benshi just because he's everyone's favorite torch test.
Sure.
So just first thing, and this is totally minor. But are you able to change the environment background? Because Cura is always kind of bright white, and Prusa Slicer is this kind of space gray. Are you able to change the environment?
That is a really great question. I've never wanted to do that. I will tell you right now, I don't know that. You stumped me right off the bat, you jerk.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm not coming here with like an agenda to be like, oh, I'm going to. I'm coming in. This is like. I genuinely haven't done a deep dive into Prusa. I haven't watched a million YouTube videos like I normally do because I knew we were going to do this. And so I kind of want to be a blank canvas where you go, okay, we're gonna do this, blam. We had a meeting last week and I gave you a whole list of things that I wanted to talk about. I have subsequently forgotten all of those things and I didn't
I wrote them down. I wrote them down. I have my notes. I will say this. I do know there are some. So if you, for example, go into the configuration menu and hit preferences, you will see there are some GUI and camera selection stuff. And while you were bringing it up, I jumped in there.
By the way.
So in the top menu, hold on, I tabbed away and I lost my
configurations.
I'm gonna put you guys over here under configuration preferences.
Roger.
And then you'll see a little pop-up. Yeah. So there's a number of little customizations. So the text colors, the mode markers, the layout options, and stuff like that. Where depending on what you might be familiar, where you want tip of the day. But I didn't see anything specifically for the background color, or any of that environment. So that may be worth. By the way, guys. If this is a robust open platform. If you get on the GitHub for Prusa Slicer, there is a function for submitting feature requests and stuff like that. And so if this is something that's important to you and it's important to enough people and they get submitted, then who knows? It may be in a future version.
Rad. That's awesome.
Yeah.
One thing that I have noticed, just real quick. So a lot of times when we have one model that I'm trying to print, I'm often trying to print lots and lots and lots of them. So just learning from this, I would right-click my model, add an instance if I just want to make another one, set a number of instances. Let's say I would like 8 total. It'd populate all of them, and then I would Control A to select all of them, and then Layout to separate all of them. Is there a way to auto-separate them? You could find in preferences.
Automatically lay out. Good question.
By the way, none of these questions that I'm asking are stuff that we've talked about before. So sorry about this.
I know. No, that's totally fine. This is almost easier for me sometimes to just create, and I wanna, let's see, geometry, reset defaults. If there was, it would be back in that preferences model, general. Let's see, auto center. There's auto centering of parts.
That's rad.
I don't believe there's an auto layout. One thing I will draw your attention to, if you close out that menu and you right click on the layout button that you'd clicked on to do that, you'll notice there's some options there, and this is a common interface for this. So where you can actually control your spacing. You may have noticed this and whatnot, but there's the ability to turn on and off rotations and whatnot.
Is there a hotkey then? Is it like, what happens if you hold shift and press A, for example? Is that something instead of pressing menus that you could just select all and then does shift A do anything?
Hey, there we go.
So the hotkey I think is pretty awesome for that.
There you go.
Damn,
we're learning as we go.
Right at the bat, not bad.
Yeah. So it's not automatic, but if you mouse over, you'll see hotkeys for everything.
That is totally what I'm looking for.
And the hotkeys to me are even not even more, but they're up there in usefulness in terms of like we talk about that all the time in our Fusion course. Is just how useful it is to get used to know what the shortcut key is or to create your own. And on that note, actually related to, I have a quick question: is there a way to make your own hotkeys in Prusa Slicer? Is that something that's possible?
I believe so. Let's see here. View type. It's under. I wonder if it's using the system key codes inside of reload from disk. You guys are just hammering me with like.
We're hammering. I know. This is weird. This is weird stuff that we have all right out the gate. Don't worry. We will make you look great for the rest of this.
Hold on.
We've got some other pre-selected questions that Mr. Pooch is going to do fantastic with.
I'm not seeing. So under the help menu, there's a search. It's a very robust search. So if you click in your main menu under help, you'll notice you can type in hotkeys, you can type in anything, and it'll tell you.
Which was really nice.
For me, I'm on a Mac, so I think this experience may be a little bit different for me, but it seems that it's routing me through the keyboard management through the operating system on a Mac for me. I'm not sure how it would implement on a PC, because I do have some suggestions for hotkeys where it asks me if I want to change my keyboard shortcuts, but it uses the Mac OS interface for that. What was the other thing?
I'm not seeing anything. It doesn't look like in the forums that there's. It doesn't.
One thing I did want to add, Jake. You asked about automatic organization. Like, I think it's good to have options and let the user choose, because I would actually hate it if it auto arranged things for me based on the workflow that I do. I actually will bring a bunch of models in, and then I will disable some of them and move them off the plate when I'm doing a multi-part thing. So I like to take a little bit more control over how I do my arrangements. But to each their own. And so if there was a simple, give me a same default and that's your preferred workflow, then that may be a good suggestion for future implementation.
So one thing that you don't know about Cura, or you may have known in the past but got changed, is originally when you would pattern or multiply the amount of parts you have on a bed, in the older versions of Cura, it would always align it in a grid where everything's pointing the exact same direction, which on a lot of products is fine, because if you're like, oh, I always want to set the Z seam on the back corner, so regardless of, where it is, it's always going to be in the exact same spot. That's great. And then they changed it. So if you multiply an entire part, they're now going to be turning all your models in 90-degree rotations. So it's as packed and economical as far as the build plate as possible. And you go, oh, awesome.
And that's,
but that changes the Z seam, obviously, for all of them. And it's like, can I switch between the two? No, it's not an option to actually change it, but it is on Prusa Slice, I believe. You can change the geometry handling, so it's whatever you want, which is really, really lovely.
Yes. And again, so much of this is just personal preference stuff too. So if you have those rotations around, by default, when you arrange it, it will keep them all oriented the same way. But because you had enable rotations on, it started flipping those benches around to try to the amount of time developers have spent on nesting algorithms, right, to try to optimize how many parts you can. It's insane, right? There's so many little things that like go into it, and it's really tough. I will say this: one of my biggest requests, and we still have yet to see it, is just like a basic align tool that I'm used to, like within using Illustrator or whatever. So I can take an object and align it one to another. Like my mind works that way. I love that. Same thing like distribute. Like I would love to see the standard tool set that we see inside of like Adobe 2D platforms or whatever, or where we can set distribution of spacing and alignment and stuff like that, because I like to snap stuff around that way. Maybe in the future edition, we'll see.
I hope so. I am literally just playing around like a child, like just clicking around the buttons. I just realized there was a button called fill bed with instances where it literally maximizes the amount of things that you can have on your build plate, which I wish I knew was a tool like last week when we were doing bulk printing. I wish I knew that. Damn, that is really handy. That is such a simple, handy thing.
I mean, look at the complexity that's going in there. It's like, you know what? I can fit more benches in here if I flip the hull, the port and the starboard sides, and nest them in that way. And then and it's not even perfect. Like there's interesting stuff, and this was a recent release where it's like it can actually start to, if you have like a ring, it can start to like internally nest things into stuff, which historically is a really complicated thing to describe. It's used to setting a boundary of a particular geometry and not necessarily using internal cut spaces and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of really cool stuff that's coming up on that. Would you like me to
really quick?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So one of the things that I often do in Cura is that if I've got my platter, I've got a bunch of parts on it. There's in Cura in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a bunch of cubes, kind of like a view cube in Fusion, where you can click a face and it will give you like a perfect head-on view, or like a perfectly orthogonal. Is there a way where you can get perfectly head-on straight shots?
Yes. So I would use a little something out of Josh's thing, and I would use the keyboard shortcuts for the ISO. Okay. So under view, there's the ISO view, top view, bottom view, front, and I believe by default, let's check the GUI again. So under preferences, there's a camera option for using perspective. You would want to turn off the under camera tab there. Camera, there you go. Turn off the perspective. Yeah, and now if you start hitting 1, 2, 3, or 4, you've got perfect. So for the engineer-minded out there that want that, is it orthogonal? The straight on
is
orthogonal,
perpendicular. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want that view where you can see exactly how it lines up, that's how you would go about doing that. That's a lot of benchies, indeed.
That's a lot of benchies.
How many benchies is that?
One of the things I think, as we kind of teased this early on. We were talking about where how CAD and Slicer softwares, the interplay between them is starting to get a little bit blurry. And so one of the considerations you might make when you design something now is, instead of designing 2 or 3 of them in the CAD software, it's probably easier to replicate them inside of your Slicer software, right? And so this, I think, is one of the easiest instances of don't make 4 of the same tire,
right?
And export them all separately. Just export 1 and make 4 of them.
Same thing for mirroring. It's a lot of processing work in CAD to mirror a 3D object. And it's obviously exponential the more complicated the model is. Just chuck it into your Slicer and just mirror it, because it's way, way, way faster. The CAD file is gigantic. The STL is tiny in comparison. It's on the kilobyte scale. So mirroring is way, way, way easier in the Slicer than CAD.
Yeah. I this is such an interesting topic to me, and we could talk about it for forever. We won't, but it's all about workflow. And if you do this professionally, the amount of time that it takes to have to switch between tools is substantial. And so obviously Prusa has been asked multiple times, like, are you going to create your own CAD package? And Joseph has been on record, Rosano, like, we don't want to make our own CAD package. What we want to do is make it as quick and easy for you to do, like the most, 80-20 rule. What are the things that you're doing most often? Mirroring, aligning, things like that make
cutting,
things easier.
joining.
joining. I mean, the cutting and joint, like if there was no other tool that this thing did, I mean, there's a bajillion other things, but the cutting tool is just so useful, because think about how everybody was like, oh, I need a bigger printer because I want to do this all in one shot. And there weren't really great options. You either had to know how to in CAD chop it into pieces and pin it all together, and then you'd have to test it and all this stuff. That's a fantastic example of something that you can tune in the slicer and not have to worry about in your CAD package, because the CAD really should be focused on what the model is, not the how you're going to go about making it. Maybe that's my I don't think you can be quite that naive, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I kind of want to expand on that with a CAD perspective. Most of the time that I'm printing something that I would like to cut that's complicated, it's not something that I downloaded, or it's not something that I made. It is something that I downloaded from Printables or Thingiverse, and pulling that very, very complicated STL into a CAD program like Fusion just to do a single cut so you can export 2 parts is a huge amount of computational work. It's gigantic. But in a slicer, it is so easy to do. And so that's absolutely one of the scenarios that I recommend people avoid reaching to the CAD tool and definitely go towards the slicer tool. It's just night and day better.
And a lot of times you don't have the luxury. You might not have like actually geometric model. You might only have a mesh, right? And you know how much worse that is when you're taking a mesh into something like Fusion and trying to figure out how to manipulate, right? And it's just way easier to stay in the slicer. So those are the kinds of tools that I think Prusa is invested in trying to optimize and find that low-hanging fruit.
That's amazing. I mean, that's like such a like a work enhancer, workflow enhancer. That's so nice to have.
So right now on my screen, I've just got a benchy that I'm planning on slicing in half. And I'm just kind of messing around with it, where you can change the angle of it. Josh, if you want to bring it up on screen.
It's on screen.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, messing around with the different angles, you can kind of cut it up. Object A, object B. Can you actually delete one of them? Like, I only want to print the bottom purple hull, for example.
Yeah, so you'll see there's 2 checkboxes for object A, object B. So you can tick off one of those, whichever piece you want to keep or not keep.
A.
Right, and if you perform your cut, it'll just like.
Will that hide the other one?
You got to perform the cut.
I didn't
hit
actually
the slice.
Make the cut.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Excuse me.
There you go. Now I've got a hacked. Yeah, like somebody just lightsabered right through Benchy.
So if I go, oh, whoops, I completely messed that up. How do I get back to that cut?
Control Z, baby. I mean, you can. I would just go back and hold on a second. So you can redo. You might be able to right click and edit cut. I'm not sure if that's in the non. Let's see if that's an option, because I know that is a way to manipulate stuff. I'm not sure if it's actually
if I do perform that cut and then
data
I do
or not.
And it auto positions it.
By the way, that would be pretty tricky in CAD.
So
it's like not fun to do that.
Yeah. Oh no. It's yet it's something. Go over on the right menu there. We may lose once you perform the cut, we may actually lose the cut history. Try one other thing. Right click on either of those 2 components. We don't have it on this. No, that's not what we want. That would actually put them together as an object. So I would just Control Z back and re-implement the cut. It doesn't look like it's retaining the cut data in this case. That's an interesting comment, though. I hadn't thought about that. So a couple things I want to highlight, if I might, because the cut tool is incredibly powerful. If you don't mind, can I share my screen?
You got it. Yeah, shared.
And let me just maneuver a couple things. So let's see. We should be just seeing an empty bed. So one of the really, we mentioned like CAD and stuff, but like for demonstration purposes, like you can, I don't know if you'd noticed this stuff, but like just adding basic shapes. So and you can use this for like all kinds of things, whether it's creating support structures, modifiers, if you just want to create some mouse ears to like hold your print down. There's all kinds of reasons that just having some basic geometry inside of the slicer is just an awesome thing to have. But for my sake right now, I'm just going to use this to do some illustration on a couple of these tools that we're showing off. So I'm going to implement a cut here, like Jake said, and we've already seen that this is a relatively new thing. It used to be you just could pick at a layer where you were cutting, right? So you would just work on the Z. Now we've got all kinds of crazy stuff where we can like do these biased cuts, and you'll see what Jake was showing off was just a basic planar cut. One of the really cool things that anybody that's getting into, just reset this really quick, and I'm going to snap it to a 90 this way. Anybody that's getting into cosplay or doing a lot of larger prints that they're putting together for various things, we've got this just fantastic set of tools inside the cut tool now for joinery. By that, I mean, you saw the planar cut, and then there's some options to add connectors, right? So before I do the connector, I'm going to actually start with one of my favorite. Anybody coming from woodworking land knows about the dovetail. And this is such a satisfying thing. Like if you guys, want to just play with something, like run a cut on a basic shape and do a quick print of something and add a dovetail to it. And then just slide the two pieces together and just feel a little bit of joy. Okay. Because it's just such a great feeling when you've got that perfect interface, and there's all these great little manipulators in here. So you saw, like, I can certainly manipulate like where my cut position is on the face. I can manipulate the size and the depth of the dovetail. And then right here, this is the important one, depending on your printer and stuff, hitting that tolerance right. So you can see when I look at it from the side, how much gap it's basically leaving.
Oh, it's actually
and what's a great tool set for doing some iterative testing is do a couple multiple instances like Jake was showing earlier. And then instead of printing, testing, reprinting, print 3 or 4 with some known sets of tolerances to get a little Sharpie out and say, this was my 0.10, this was my 0.2, whatever. And then try fitting them together. And then right off the bat, you run one print and you know exactly what you need. And then when you go back in and do it with the full send, that's going to take a lot longer, you save yourself a ton of time. So multi-iterative testing is such a great application for this type of thing.
We had a question in here. I think that's a little bit related. So I just wanted to highlight it here. So Spitfire says, is there a way to make holes larger on an existing STL?
Make holes larger. So you've modeled holes into your file. And he's asking if you could, if there's an intelligence in the slicer to manipulate the size of the hole.
Yeah. Or can you remove? So question for you. Well, so question for you is, like, you can create shapes. Can you actually? Are there booleans for those? Can you remove a shape from another shape? Could you cut a cylinder out from something? So then you could just draw a cylinder. Okay. So sorry.
Do you want me to jump onto that? Yeah.
Do it.
No. You can certainly do that. So there's a couple of ways to go about this. There is some options where it will globally look at tolerances and try to compensate for internal dimensions and your perimeter extrusion thicknesses. There's like an XY compensation, but that's happening on the global. My recommendation, if you can't go back into the CAD, I mean, really, truly, you should probably do it in the CAD. But you could take your object. So I'm going to start with, let's just do the standard box. And we're going to add a...
where are you getting these really simple shapes, by the way?
Yeah, these shapes are rad. This feels like, by the way, this feels a lot like Tinkercad. This, like,
it kind of does, right?
Yeah, which is rad.
This right hand menu over here just is your running list of objects that are on the slicer. So if you import something, it would have this, and every time you do an instance, and it shows you grouping and stuff like that. But if I right click over here, I can just add a shape, and this is where I can add all kinds of interesting stuff: box, cylinder, sphere, my basic primitives. So I'm just adding a box and a cylinder, and I can either manually manipulate scale by like holding down shift and it'll globally, or I can just grab either the handles, or I can come down here into my little size and scale. And so right now it's telling me my default. I don't know why it picks these sizes, but let's just say we want it to be a 10 by 10 by 25. So I can see my dimensions down here, if you notice where I'm hovering over.
Bottom right there.
Yeah, and so if I were to take this and then make make this a modifier. So if I changed the type, let's see, I'm going to do it. Let's cylinder. What's the one I want? Probably.
While Pooch is figuring that out, the other option is to use a drill.
Oh, love it. That's if it's too small.
Yeah, obviously if it's like
way.
a 1-inch hole and you need to make it a half a point of something larger, fair enough. Or if you need to make it smaller, obviously, that's a problem. But the amount of things that I
actually you could make it smaller with a threaded insert.
So much time.
You could make it smaller with a threaded insert.
I mean, you certainly could. You certainly could. All right, so
don't forget real tools in real life also exist, guys.
I love that tip. That's so good.
All right, so what I just did is, and this is really powerful when you started getting into the modifiers and stuff. So what I did is I right-clicked on my object over here. I'm going to back up so you guys can see what I did. We're going to go back to the CAD view or the model view. And so I had my box and I could add a second shape, and I swear there's a way to actually change the type, but I, for some reason, am not seeing it at the moment. So I'm just going to do and add a negative volume. So what that means is like in Tinkercad, I'm doing a Boolean subtract basically, where I'm taking my secondary object. And if I just want to show you like this without manipulating, I think you saw that I put a hole in it. But if I slice it now, it's basically just chomping out. So you see I have them grouped here. And this is the basis of a lot of really interesting stuff that you can do inside of Prusa Slicer. And we could spend lots of time on this. But if instead of a negative volume, I wanted to create custom supports, there's all kinds of interesting support blockers, enforcers. So anywhere that I wanted there to not be, so if I say I had something that needed supports everywhere, but like one thing, I didn't want to have to like manually go in there. I could just say, hey, everywhere that this volume of this object occupies, don't put supports there. That's what these modifiers are doing. The other really interesting thing is if I take an object here and I set it up as a modifier, what that means is I can come in here and I can change the layer and the infill settings for this, where I can disable, for example, my top and bottom layers only on that selection. And I could change the infill to be like a different pattern. And so when I slice it, I start to get like really wild exposed parts of the model, where you can implement, like you were showing on your coaster right off the bat, not just on a global level by just removing the top and bottom layer, but now by like implementing other geometry within geometry to create some really cool effects. I use that actually. So I've been making these bins for my IKEA Calyx setup. And when you're printing giant bins or giant surface areas, especially, and you want a large flat thing on the heated build plate, there can oftentimes be a tendency to warp. And so what I'll do is I'll add a modifier where I change that base to like actually just a fine mesh, not like a solid infill. And then I can do all kinds of really cool stuff, like putting a honeycomb pattern on stuff without manipulating the entire thing to exist that way. That's where these modifiers are really, really powerful.
That's awesome. And Ethan, so Ethan, Maker Faire OC coordinator, says, sorry, I'm late, but getting it to a very specific spot is tough, like say centered perfectly or 4 to make for equal holes at the corners. So that's and that's where the align tool, like that I keep saying, like we got to get that align tool. We got to get this like where we can start to snap objects together, like will really, I think, enhance stuff. Some of the tips that I would recommend for what Ethan's talking about, like you can certainly use the manipulators down. And I can't be there we go, shows up again.
Josh,
where you start looking at
Yep.
So there's position coordinates for stuff here. So you can certainly manipulate the positioning very accurately by understanding the position of one or the other, but it's much more cumbersome than just like having to know where one position is and then calculate half of it and move the other part. So kind of have the ability, lots of room for improvement, I would say, in that arena.
Well, and that's one of those philosophical questions too, is at what point are you actually just a CAD software? And so you start to blur those, the blurrier those lines get, the more you're actually developing a pretty robust CAD software. Because I'm looking at that and I'm saying that's basically a rudimentary Tinkercad, which
that is CAD.
already on the path towards CAD.
I mean, what's interesting was these tools were originally implemented. If you go back historically and look at it, they were originally implemented to be more like assistance in getting a good print, right? So mouse ears, like you guys familiar with the concept of mouse ears, where if you've got something that's warping off the plate, you just want to add some little discs maybe to the corners so you have more surface area that can like stay grabbed on, right? And so originally these geometries were kind of put in there so you could kind of just add some quick and dirty manipulators and test out to assist the print function, which is why it kind of started that way. And then it became more and more powerful as people started using it. So yeah, the lines have become kind of blurred. You're right, Josh.
Which is interesting.
Which I kind of like. Yeah.
It leads, no, I think this is one of the reasons I'm so excited about Prusa Slicer, is these blurry lines give you a lot of potential. So, and then Ethan has another quick follow-up here. Yeah. Are the positions set at the center of the object?
It depends if you have the coordinate system. So there's an object coordinates. If you see, I don't know if you want to go back to my screen real quick. When you set up here, there's an option for setting world or object coordinates, and that's where you're basically setting your points of reference for where you're at. So right now, world is just relative to where on the bed you are. I tend to stay in world because I have a hard time with like relative distance stuff.
And 0, 0 is bottom left in the world?
I believe so. Let's find out. It is bottom left, yes. Yeah. I think you set that on the machine parameters, so it depends. You might have a printer where it thinks home is in the middle, so then your world would be centered here.
Got it.
Right? I think by default here, wherever you see your little XY axes, like here, this guy. You can't see my mouse, but I'm on the bottom left where you see the green and the red and the blue arrows.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Perfect, man. So continuing off of the kind of merging between slicing softwares and CAD, one thing that I was having a little bit of trouble with is one of the new features that I was actually really, really stoked about. That is placing text onto a model and actually having it wrap around to emboss. Because coming from the CAD side, it's most of the time it's perfectly fine. So to go in Fusion, if you just had a two-dimensional round object, a cylinder, something like a water bottle, that's pretty easy. You make text on a plane and then it just wraps around. And if you had what's called a compound curve, where it's curving not only this way but also that way, it's like a sphere, it just did not do it at all. And then one of the updates early last year said, hey, we can now do compound curves. And it's like, that's fantastic. That's great. But if you're
talking about like the emboss tool in Fusion?
The emboss tool, But if you have multiple or jagged faces or just complicated surface, it either gives you a total error or it takes 100 years to actually solve it, and then it stalls, and then the computer crashes, and it's a nightmare. And Prusa seemed to just completely ignore the difficulties of it and just kind of solve it, which I was just so excited to see.
Hold my pivot, which is
put it on the text, and it was just
do it. Just put it right. It's right there. Just put it there.
Just do it. And
let's do it.
Without doing any.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So you go ahead. Yeah, you talk. And
I actually want to do it on my screen. If that's
you do it on your screen. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. If you want to,
you are the learn.
Okay, can you guys see my benchy?
Yep,
I see your benchy.
Cool. All right. So I wanted to put the just a little bit of text on the side. So I tried this without doing any research, watching any videos, reading any articles,
Okay.
just to see
All right. So
how
you tried to intuit it. Yes.
doable thank you.
Okay.
Just how intuitive it is. And I was able to get obviously a flat plane of text to be tangent to any of the surfaces on the hull, but it was just still laying kind of flat. It wasn't wrapping around. And some of the videos that I checked afterwards, I'm sure you guys have done an update since that video was made, because I was like, I can't find that one tool. What am I looking for? And so while you're here, I know it's super duper simple, and I'm just being dumb, but I wanted to figure this out. So tell me what to do, and I'll do it.
All right. This is an interesting challenge. All right. So using that right menu that I was showing off that has our text list of objects, if you right click on your Benchy object there, and I'm kind of like squinting. I'm gonna see if I can't zoom in on your thing so I can kind of see what I'm talking about. So yeah, we're gonna go down to add. First of all, you're on the latest version, correct? Yeah. Yes. So the answer to this is going to depend on what exactly we're trying to do. My assumption is we're just going to add either an emboss or a deboss text. But there's
I just want to put my name
there's also
onto the hull.
Perfect. Okay, so what? Yeah, so you're going to go add part like you had there, and you're going to go over to that secondary menu, and you're going to hit text. Yep. There you go.
Okay, groovy.
All right. Now, you'll see it just threw it down on the base structure. The zoom tool is our friend here. So let's zoom in. And honestly, if you want to change the font to something that's like a little heavier, it might be easier to grab. The way they have the manipulation on this, do like an Arial black or something where it's just a little easier to grab the green parts of the text that are slided. Yeah, there you go. All right. Now click any... Yeah, there you go. So click any part of the text there with your mouse, like on the green. It's kind of finicky with that. And then drag, you'll see you get a little, I think you get a little target selector. Maybe it'll show that in the screen share or not. And then drag it up onto the model.
If I click and hold.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so this is what I was kind of dealing with.
Good. You got your tangent, right? That's the start. Yep. Yeah. What you want is under that little advanced, and this is where it gets it's a little different on iOS than it is, but hit advanced there, and you'll see a little checkbox that says use surface right there. Blam. And look at that.
Oh my God. I knew it was just one single button.
Right?
Obviously, I didn't put it in a good location, so it's kind of stretching a little bit.
Do me a little favor here real quick. Add some depth to it so it sticks out a little further. We're just going to be exaggerative here for the moment. Okay, so if you add some height.
5 mil?
Yeah, sure. So it's going to pop out a little bit more. And then bring the height down so it's like not quite overflowing. So it's on the entire hole. Yeah, there you go. That's fine. Right. And if you wanted to, you could rotate it. So you'll notice there's another really cool option here. So if you look at it, it's kind of extruding outward at an equidistant, right? But there's a really cool option right below that checkbox that says per glyph. And if you check that, that's going to make each letter or each glyph in your font tangent to the plane. And it makes it a little bit
it's like
more...
a radial.
Yeah, exactly.
That's rad.
And that can make it more legible. Now say, you know what? We don't want to do an emboss. That's going to create some extra overhang stuff. We don't need to stay. The reason I had you jack up the depth is you can see that use glyph feature a little bit easier that way. But very easily down at the bottom right now, what it's saying for an emboss, it calls it a join. So at the very bottom of that menu. So if you change that to a cut, it'll do a deboss, right? So go ahead and select that. So that's when it cuts in. And if you were to slice it, you would see that it would just evacuate the letters there. And you've got a little J cut in, which is kind of cool. And then the other thing, the reason I'm glad we got to talk about modifiers first is now in this case, what I was telling you earlier with the cut tool, this tool does actually retain the settings. So if you right click on that text thing, or go back to the the non-sliced view. Go back to the model view, not the slice view. And you see we still had it up, but if you click off and you lose that menu and you right click on text there, you should see an edit text option again,
it brings it
and
back.
that'll bring you right back in there. And if you want to change that to a modifier at the very bottom,
I'm not sure what that does.
So what that does is what I was showing earlier with that cylinder and stuff. I can actually tell it don't put perimeters here and change the infill to like hexagon or
Oh,
whatever, and I can create
gotcha. Yes.
I can create
Oh,
wild
that is
pattern
rad.
slices and stuff. Yeah,
That's really good.
so if you right click now on your text thing in the right menu, the object menu, and you hit that infill and those layers and perimeters, that's where you start to set your custom modifiers for that thing, and you can start to see
That's really rad. So I can change that to like
change it to change it to something small because it's a small amount of text, and then you're going to need to add a modifier for the right click on that text layer again. You can go ahead and hit enter there, and then do a layers and perimeters one, and we need to turn off perimeters so that you can actually see the infill. So, yeah, you're going to zero that out. And then you could play with, we'll just leave the fill pattern is. Go ahead and slice it now, and you can see what it's going to do. So this is a little bit wonky because what you're seeing here is the side of the, so if you're slicing it, it's still putting in infill, but because this infill runs perpendicular to the model, it's not rotating the infill. It's just exposing the infill. So if you wanted to see if you selected a 3-dimensional, like a gyroid infill or something, you would actually see some more interesting geometry. So if you go back where your infill settings are and change fill pattern on the right side from grid to say like gyroid or a 3D honeycomb or something like that, you'll start to kind of get a better visual. And honestly, you may need a more dense.
So I'm seeing that there is now the gyroid infill, what we can see here in that kind of red maroon. I can see the
so you'd want to.
We're still seeing the outer purple. I thought that would go away.
You've got some solid. You know what? You've got some solid infill. Turn off the bottom and top layers as well on the layer perimeters for that, and that should alleviate that part, I believe. Also, I would change. Well, let's go. Go ahead. Yeah, there we go. And then, but change the fill density to something a little bit thicker than the 10, so you can kind of see more of that gyroid in there.
Do
25. Just as a fun little
God, this is so much more powerful than I thought it would be.
Yeah, so you can kind of start to see some wacky options there, and for something where it's like a thicker, text, there's some neat little artistic manipulations you could do there. So by the same metric that you can do text, you can also layer on an SVG in the same way, and the interface for that is very similar. You would just import your SVG and do an emboss or deboss or a modifier.
That is so flipping cool.
Yeah,
I'm trying very hard not to swear in this podcast.
And you can like blast all the way through it. And so like that, think about like what this does for some artistic opportunities here, where you might have a model and then you want to be able to look completely through your model with your name or do some custom. The reason that the text and the emboss, the SVG are really cool is because now it opens up some really wild customization tools. And as a business owner and somebody that's always looking for neat product ideas, this is a great exploration for a lot of people that might want to like take something and make it unique for an individual customer in an easy way, where instead of having to CAD it in, maybe I can do it on the fly in the slicer,
which is really one of the best parts
to your
printing.
Yeah, and to your point right at the beginning of the pod as well, Jake, right? So you were like, hey, I've got this coaster that it was just a cylinder that's got infill pattern in there, and it looks like a totally unique and interesting thing. So yeah, kind of bringing it full circle there. I was imagining too, so we created the CADclass letters, we 3D printed the letters, and then we use different infill patterns for each of those letters as our so when we go out to events, we have the CADclass sign kind of done in that artistic way. So it seems like this opens up even more opportunity for us to get artistic and creative with that.
Absolutely.
Massively.
And then when you combine that with like color swaps and layer changes and the placards and stuff like that people are doing, you think about how many people are printing out QR codes, right? So now you can very easily you can literally make one of those placards for a printed QR code by just dragging a rectangle. You don't even have to go into CAD. Drag a rectangle. You can't generate the SVG. You would have to generate the SVG for your QR code separately, but you would import that, put it on the placard, and now you've got a really quick and easy printed QR.
That's amazing. So I just want to be
Yeah.
cognizant of time here.
Yep.
How are you on time, Pooch? You got somewhere to be immediately here?
No,
or do you
I've
want
got
to keep jamming for another 15
I've
minutes?
got time. I'm into it.
Okay.
I've got time for you guys.
All right.
One of the
I have
other
a
this is a while we're on the subject, really quick, personal request.
Mhm.
This is my number, like the alignment tool, and then this. I can't if I had to rank them, but think about serialization opportunities here. Like the slicer actually has intelligence on a number of instances. And if I want to start serializing my parts, like you can see really quickly, like the power of having a mail merge functionality where I want to feed it like a number of serial numbers or something like that into like a spreadsheet. And now it's got everything it needs to basically start putting each one. I want, of these 20 parts, give me sequential serial numbers, or you pick, column 1, 2, 3. I want to share a link and I'm post this back, and then we get as many people amplifying that as possible because I need that feature so bad. I work from it. They still won't implement. No, you should see the list. You should see the list of like requests and stuff. It's insane, right?
Oh
yeah,
it's never ending.
We understand
what
on
really
a smaller
surprised me
scale the list of requests, but a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
But customization,
weird
options, all that. Ooh, I'm so excited. Yeah, sorry.
One weird thing that I came across that I wanted to show you is not with this model. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this. It's with this this very, very popular model that I love, where it's this kind of planetary gear fidget spinner thing.
Oh
that
yeah,
I think a lot of people printed. We all love this. We used to give these away. And what I noticed was when I was slicing it, it was adding in some random extra stuff. So with Prusa, top surface is red, inner walls are yellow, outer wall is orange. Cool.
Yep.
And then on the inside, it was then, so this is just set to 3 walls. But then it's adding in all this extra material right there. So if we go
purple,
into
that is solid infill. Yes, we can talk about
solid
infill.
So my printers is set to 3. So you can see it's kind of strange. And you can see sometimes it's there and then sometimes it disappears and then comes back. And I just wanted to know, because obviously that's adding essentially an extra layer of material, an extra layer of wall, of time. How do I turn that off? Because I typed into Google weird Prusa Slicer purple angled stuff, and it gave me a bunch of examples of like really, really tight vibrations, and someone says, "Oh yeah, it's just this button," and I'm like, "Cool, I'm really happy for you guys that you solved that, but what's going on for me?"
Yeah. So, okay. So first thing that I want to draw attention to, on the top left, when you run a slice, you'll see there's a legend there and it says feature type. And if you click that, there's actually a ton of other options in that, but let's just leave it there. So that is known as solid infill. Okay. And solid infill can exist for a number of different reasons, either the way you chose to slice it, or the slicer is trying to use some intelligence sometimes. And it will automatically, on some models, throw in solid infill when there's like insufficient overlap between layers to actually get a solid surface. So it can be as a result of poor modeling, or just some variables in how thick your perimeters are that aren't going to allow good. So the slicer's trying to use some intelligence. You'll notice some of that purple showed up at the top as you kind of game there, and it was really trying to give you a little bit more of a ledge, or so it thought it needed, based on the overhang of the perimeter, so that the perimeter had something to land on that layer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's almost like internal support on the microscopic scale, basically.
It can be, and given that like every geometry, I mean, this is the challenge of writing software like this, right? Like there's an infinite number of geometries that you can throw at this thing, and it's trying to get a sane result on how can I print this, right? And so you notice even when you do that, I would make the assumption that each of those stars are symmetrical to one another, right? But like the solid infill on that center, like it threw some in there, but it doesn't throw it on any of the other ones. Every once in a while you might show it. So this is where some slight nuance or rounding errors or any number of things, like
random bit of coding.
Yep. So the other time it'll add solid infill automatically is if there's not enough printed wall for supports to attach to. We're not running support on this too, but there are. My point is that this is this is an attempt at creating some sane things to get you a good print result. Like these are the things. This is why Prusa Slicer guards you while you sleep, right? Like it's trying to get you that output that you don't even have to think about.
Yes.
So your question, like, how do I get rid of it? How do I turn it off?
So the answer is don't.
Well, sometimes it's don't, but sometimes it's like it really doesn't need. Like you see, like in that instance where it's throwing it in like midway up that center spiral,
that's like a second
or
of
here.
Printing time. It's insignificant.
Well, it's insignificant, and I wouldn't even worry about it. But I know, like, being technical individual like that might be a nuance. If you, it might be something that bugs you. If you play with your perimeter thicknesses, there's ways to like actually force or disable support. So I think you've played with this a little bit, right? But number of perimeters, or even like your extrusion thickness, if you start to manipulate that, you'll start to see it'll change, right? And that's because now it feels like it's got enough like mass. Now obviously that's going to slow down and use a lot more material than you want. So if you don't want to necessarily have to add a whole nother perimeter, the other thing I would look at if you're bugged by this kind of thing, there's under the print settings, you can go back to 3 perimeters if you want. And if we play with this, or 2, or whatever number you want, if you go to under advanced on the left there, I believe, if my memory serves, you see how there's a default extrusion width right there. If you toggle that up to like a 0.46 or a 0.5, or if you play with that a little bit, where it's again within the realm of like insignificant really in terms of like what it's doing, but it's just enough for the slicer engine to like go, I have the gap I need, or I don't have the gap. Yeah, so you can do a little fidgeting, and I'll do that sometimes. Like if it's a big model, like those little extra bits of solid infill like can really add up on time. And so just playing with a little bit, and you can see on the bottom right in your preview when you slice, it'll tell you the difference in time. In terms of the aggregate. So at the bottom, once you complete a slice, it tells you how long the slice is going to take. And then, but more in the indicator, you see up here, like you've got solid infill. And right now it's telling you 12 minutes of this print is going to be in solid infill. And so by playing with this, you might be able to cut down minutes or even hours, depending on what the thing is, by just playing with that. The other thing to watch for, you don't have it in this case, but gap infill is another great example where it's trying to kind of fill in, it doesn't make sense for it to do a zigzag top infill, but it's like, you're in between perimeter thicknesses, and that's where you can kind of play with things to remove the extra print time that a solid infill or a gap infill creates. I hope that makes sense.
One thing that absolutely. One thing that I do want to kind of show off of that I didn't know I needed, but it's so obvious. If I just bring back in another Benchy. So right now I have, I think, 0% infill on this.
Yeah.
And when it's doing, obviously the inside, it's empty. Obviously. But then right when it gets to this level, it just adds in this little blue, it's essentially support material. It's a bridging support.
It's a bridge. Yeah, it's a bridge. Yeah.
And it does this automatically without me actually doing any of it. And this, I didn't even realize it, that I accidentally set it to 0% infill. And then it was only until I printed my model looked great. And then I went back to it and actually analyzed my code. I'm like, oh my gosh, it fixed everything. It did it for me. And I was like, that is doing that kind of helping behind the scene is really what's pushing me from Cura to Prusa Slicer. This unbelievably helpful thing is actually really phenomenal.
There's some just really cool. It blows my mind to think about like how to even program something like that. So hats off to the developers that do this kind of thing. But like, there is a lot of focus on creating some sane experience because we know full well that it's not fun if you just want to get printing and you don't know what you're doing. And like, we want to get to a good result as quick as possible. And I think that's been a core ethos of Prusa for a long time, that workflow, and that like, I just want to be printing and I don't want to have to like learn all this nuance of how to slice and all of that stuff. That's what brings new people into the fold, and then encourages them. Like the sooner you get to success, the better you feel about it, the more likely you are to stick with it.
100%
I totally agree.
100% agree. Quick thing here that was a little earlier in the chat I want to hit before we forget. So David Dickens earlier said, can you ask if they have plans to improve the color painting in the slicer? It can be so painful. I've never used it, so
yeah, most definitely. So what David's talking about is if you've ever used the MMU, or if you've ever used the now we have the tool changer, the XL, or done multi-extrusion printing and stuff like that, we start to have options now where we can have it automatically change colors for us and whatnot. And we're seeing more and more people taking models now and making them into multi-color models or multi-material models. And absolutely, I know there is a core focus on this because there's so many new possibilities opened up. There's a lot of nuance. I don't know if you saw Joel's latest video where he was talking about painting the eyeballs on his like candy corn demon with the knife that Chaos Cortec made. That's a great example where you know the
any of that at all.
Yeah. Some people in the chat may know what I'm talking about. Joel did a video where he's doing a multicolor thing on the XL, but it was not a multicolor model. It was not made to be multicolor. And so we have these painting tools now that allow us to go in and just like paint the areas of the eyeball that we want to be blue instead of the, whatever it might be. The problem is it's tough to get the precise boundary definition of like where the depth and the embossed and stuff are, and some slicers have some better intelligence that will kind of automatically detect like the triangular the triangle boundaries or the vertex boundaries of like what should define, so that you can do something more like a bucket fill inside of Photoshop or something where there's some more intelligence to it rather than having to manually paint it. It is a tedious process. We're going to see more modelers just kind of creating stuff with multicolor in mind, which will be great. But what's great about having these tools in the slicer is there's so many tens of thousands of models that already exist that can now be ported into multicolor things. And I think the one last thing we should make sure we touch upon is that if somebody goes to that trouble and does that and wants to share it back, you have to save all of that definition within your slicer file, like, right? Because it's not tied to the CAD model itself. And we talked about this offline earlier, but one of the really powerful things inside Prusa Slicer is now I can export something that includes the model, the print settings, and all the manipulations that I've done to it. And I can hand it to you, Jake, and you can improve upon it however you see fit, rather than having to like just import the STL and go through the entire process.
And then remake it every single setting by one, which
Exactly. So workflow wise, I'm getting way better about the same way I do in CAD. Immediately I open a new file, I save it as something in my projects folder. Same thing. I create a 3MF file in my projects folder with what I'm working on that's retaining what printer I have selected, what printer settings I have, all those customizations, and it stays with it along with the geometry.
Absolutely fantastic, man. Well, I don't think we want to take that too much more.
I was going to say, do we want to hit one more question, or do we want to call that good for now? How are you feeling, Jake?
Let me close the loop on this really quick. Share your screen again, Jake, really quick for what people that just don't know what I'm talking about.
God, one more time, really?
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're here for. In the file menu, it's just export configuration.
File export.
So export config. If you want to the whole thing, you'd say export config bundle or export config bundle with the physical printers. That would actually retain all of your printer data as well if you had a bunch of tuned machine profiles and stuff in there. But for most people, export config bundle would include both the model and and it basically kicks out a giant INI file so when they load it into their Prusa Slicer, it retains everything that you have done.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is so rad. Well, thank you so much for being on here, man.
That was awesome. That was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. I feel like I just went through.
Yeah.
Of course.
And guys, like there's it goes so much deeper. We glossed over all sorts of stuff. I really encourage you guys, if you want to explore, look at that cut tool, play with the pins, play with the connect. There's a ton of different connection profiles. That's a really deep and robust thing. Paintable supports. There's a ton of other really nifty little things that are worth playing with that'll really up your 3D printing game. I recommend them highly. So there's some homework for everybody.
Well, this has been the CADclass Podcast special edition with Pooch, Repkord, Prusa.
All the things.
Guys,
again, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if you're back around tomorrow is our normal pod, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. And we also have, I know we're talking Prusa Slicer in here, but Jake, we just launched a Cura Slicer course as well. And a lot of the topics that we talked about are there. So, don't forget to check that out. But it has been awesome. And we will see some of you tomorrow morning. Take care.
See you guys.
Guys, thanks for having me. Have a good one. See you.
Cheers.
See you.